The minutes from the June Fed are out. The key quote, significant risk that elevated inflation could become entrenched if the public began to question the resolve of the Fed. So they went from transient to now fearing entrenched. Jobs have slipped a little bit. This is something we've been talking about. But just to give some context here, we're still at a historic number of job openings. We peaked in March, 11.9 million. In May, we dropped down to 11.3, and 11 million for 6 straight months. It's just extraordinary. If you look at this Fred chart, it's just astounding to think that this many jobs are available, 2 for 1 in the United States. There are 2 jobs available for every 1 person who needs a job, and they're just absolutely stunning. If you look at the
what do you think this is a precursor to?
Dropping down dramatically in the white collar sector is what the data is showing.
Or major wage inflation. I mean,
yeah,
that work clearly has to be done. And if you lay people off, the number of unemployed will go up. But at the end of the day, the thing that we know here is we have a structural unemployment problem. As you said, 2 openings for every person, which means those openings aren't paying enough for people to leave the sidelines and get on the field.
Yeah, or
they've been incentivized to be on the sidelines. Exactly. So obviously, yeah, these job openings might actually be indicative of the opposite of what the Fed is telling us, right? The Fed wants us to believe that they can just keep jacking up rates and then we're not going to go into a recession because we have all these open job recs. But what if we should see the labor market as really 2 separate markets? There's sort of white collar professionals, and you're seeing all of these tech companies that we're involved in slam on the brakes really quickly right now. Yep. So we're going to see greater unemployment there. And then on the blue collar side, you have this issue of record low labor participation. Yep. And so you still have inflation there because they can't fill all the jobs because there's all these like warped incentives around that.
There are, to just put a number on it, Sachs, we're 10% off the peak in terms of participation. And if those folks would participate, it would really fill a lot of these jobs.
That would increase the production of goods and services, and that might take some of the pressure off inflation.
And it would also increase monetary velocity, right, Sachs? People would spend the money they make, which then get us out of this mess possibly.
I think part of the problem with the Fed's approach here is that it's assuming that if they just keep jacking up rates, that will reduce demand and that will stop or slow down inflation. And there's some truth to that. However, I don't think this inflation is purely a problem of excess demand. I think there's also a supply problem, meaning that not enough goods and services are being produced, and the commodities, the inputs that we need to the production of goods and services, those prices are increased. They've been inflated. And that started well before the Ukraine war, but I think the Ukraine war has now exacerbated this problem with respect to energy and food.
If you had 7 minutes for your over-under for Sachs to mention Ukraine, you took the under, you won.
Well, I'm just mentioning it as a exacerbator of the situation. Exacerbator.
I think that's actually really good framing, that it's an exacerbator.
This it didn't start with this.
Yeah, so if you look at the quits, let me just give you the quits number because this is really interesting. These are people who are obviously quitting jobs. It's still at a record high. So this concept of the Great Resignation, we're still having over 4 million people quit their jobs every month. Pre-pandemic, quits averaged under 3 million a month. And if you look at that chart, it's just staggering to think that in an economy that's going down, people are still quitting. Now, what is that indicative of? It's indicative of people believing that they can get another job. You don't quit your job if you don't think you can get another one, or you have some savings available and you want to YOLO, maybe, spend a little free time going on vacation.
Or there's a new economy emerging, right? I mean, one of the cases to be made is that the pandemic and the stimulus that followed created a staggering short shift in the types of jobs and the types of businesses that people, use to make money. And, a lot of people were able to shift to work from home. And when you shift to work from home, you have more flexibility and freedom to choose other jobs that you can now do from home. And people don't want to work in restaurants. They don't want to work in fast food. And if they can find another job, a gig-like or services-like or on-demand type job where they can have more freedom and flexibility and more earnings in their life, they'll make that choice. And this happened so quickly because of the shutdown, the lockdowns, and then the stimulus, the $1 trillion or $2 trillion that poured in. It created all these new opportunities and all these new incentives for new types of work. And the fact is, the old economy, the old businesses, all the fast food restaurants and the coffee shops, they're sitting with half employment and they can't fill the jobs because that's, that used to be a job that there was demand for, and now it's not the case. And I think that, that's what, by the way, I don't know if that necessarily reverts in the near term, because I do think that there's been a substantial, almost permanent change in some of these sectors of the economy, not necessarily all, some will revert, but it leaves big gaps in parts of the economy, and maybe fast food restaurants are not going to be as cheap as they used to be, because in order to get people to work there, you got to charge more. And there's other parts of the economy like services and selling stuff on Etsy and whatnot that are working for people.
Let me just put a number on that and then hand it off to you, Sachs. To just put a number on that, the jobs that fell the most, white collar, off 325,000, and manufacturing, 208,000. The jobs that are increasing the most, hospitality and retail. So exactly to your point, people feel more options. This whole thing was accelerated during the pandemic. Sachs.
Well, the question I want to ask Friedberg is, do you actually think that these new options of work from home and remote work have actually made the economy more productive? It seems to me that obviously employees, if you give them the freedom over the decision of their trade-off between work and leisure, and let them decide how much they're going to work.
It's made the economy more expensive.
How so?
If you take a big step back to the day before the lockdowns started, we had a normal functioning economy that was growing by, call it, 2% a year. And the minute that we enforced these lockdowns, I actually think what we did was we started a supply-side recession. It's what Sachs said earlier. So what does that mean? Let's just say you're a factory and you make wheels. Okay, just make something really simple. You were growing at 2% a year. Everything seemed hunky-dory. You had employees. It was fine. You used to sell your products, make 10, 15% profits. Everything was fine. And then the day after, the government said, you need to shut your factory down because we can't have people spending too much time close together because we need to get a handle on this pandemic. Okay, so you shut it down. And then for the next 12 or 18 months, what happens? That stuff sits idle. These people that used to work for you get $2.5 trillion put into their bank accounts. They spend their time doing other things. And then all of a sudden people say, okay, it's time to start the factory up again. People want to buy wheels. And now all of a sudden you find that because everything all around the world was shut down, there's no rubber to make the wheels. There's no steel to make the axle. There's no people to put them all together. And so what happens? Well, prices go up because, again, you gave everybody else $2.5 trillion. So they're like, well, I used to pay $1 for your wheel. I'm willing to pay you $2 now. Just make the wheel. Give it to me before you give it to somebody else. So that is like the classic definition of a supply side recession.
There's another piece to that too, Chamath.
And sorry, just to finish the point. And the Fed basically confirmed this in the minutes that they just released today. Jason, can you just read the quote that you had in the notes?
Well, the one up top, a significant risk that elevated inflation should become entrenched if the public begins to question their resolve.
I think the point is that, we were kind of in a supply side recession, and now by raising rates to some crazy amount, the end of which we're still not sure about, may actually then trigger the demand destruction to have a demand side recession. And so I don't know that we have lived in a modern point in time where both things have been true, right? There's been a principle of macroeconomics that everybody's always kind of debating, is this a supply side issue? Is it a demand side issue? We know that in COVID, it was a supply side issue. We took all the supply out of the market. And now we're trying to figure out, when we exhaust, all of the money we've given people, and we destroy demand and take the incentives for demand to go away, right? Consumer confidence is now starting to turn. What happens then? Well, we're going to figure that out in the next 6 or 9 months. But the thing is, you have both that are true. It's not as if the supply side of the economy has been fixed. It's not as if everybody is running at 100% capacity. It's not as if all the supply chain issues have been worked out.
Yep.
So I don't know. I just think it's a very complicated situation.